The doctor had just told me the chemo was working when the sheriff's deputy walked into my hospital room and handed me a restraining order. I almost thanked him out of habit. 61 years of Midwestern politeness will do that to you, even when someone's accusing you of being a monster. My name is David Mercer. I'm 63 years old, and I'm sitting in a recliner at the Siteman Cancer Center in St. Louis, Missouri, with a portacath in my chest and enough cyclophosphamide in my bloodstream to kill every fast-dividing cell in my body, good or bad. According to the paperwork the deputy left on my bedside table, I'd also been spending my evenings terrorizing my ex-wife 400 miles away in Nashville, Tennessee, showing up at her office at Vanderbilt Medical Center, leaving threatening notes on her car, following her to restaurants, her gym, her Sunday morning church service. The dates listed on the complaint were March through July of this year. The same 5 months I'd been undergoing aggressive chemotherapy for non-Hodgkin lymphoma at one of the best cancer centers in the country. I couldn't have terrorized a housefly during those months. Most days, I couldn't keep down a glass of water. I called my daughter first. Not my lawyer, not a friend. My daughter, Claire. She's 34, works as a forensic accountant in Chicago, and she's got a mind like a steel trap. When I read her the allegations over the phone, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Dad, this isn't random. Someone's building a case against you. We need to figure out why." I should back up and explain how I got here. Not the cancer, the whole mess. I spent 36 years building a commercial roofing company in Springfield, Missouri. Mercer and Sons, though it was really just Mercer and a rotating crew of hard-working men who trusted me to keep the contracts coming. For most of those years, it worked. We did strip malls, warehouses, hospital wings, school additions, honest work, decent money. Then in 2022, our biggest client, a developer out of Kansas City, declared bankruptcy mid-project. They owed us $620,000. That single default cascaded through everything. I couldn't pay my suppliers, couldn't make payroll, couldn't service the equipment loans. Within 8 months, Mercer and Sons was gone. 36 years, dissolved in a filing at the Greene County Courthouse. My wife, Karen, had tolerated a lot during our marriage. Long hours, missed anniversaries, the stress of running a business that lived and died by the weather and the economy. But watching our retirement savings evaporate was the thing she couldn't forgive. She blamed me for not having better insurance, for trusting the developer, for not diversifying. Maybe she was right about some of it, but the way she delivered the divorce papers, through her sister, while I was meeting with the bankruptcy attorney, that told me everything I needed to know about where her compassion ended. The divorce was finalized in the fall of 2023. Karen moved to Nashville to be near her college roommate and start fresh. I stayed in Springfield, in a rental apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes, trying to figure out what 61 years of living had amounted to. That's when the fatigue started. I chalked it up to depression at first, then the night sweats began, and the lymph nodes in my neck swelled to the size of walnuts. By January, I had a diagnosis. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, stage 3. My oncologist, Dr. Reeves, laid it out plainly. 6 cycles of R-CHOP chemotherapy, each cycle lasting 21 days. Side effects would include severe nausea, immune suppression, neuropathy in the hands and feet, and fatigue so profound that walking to the mailbox would feel like climbing Everest. Treatment began February 3rd. By the end of February, I'd lost 22 pounds and most of my hair. By March, I had an infection that landed me in the hospital for 9 days because my white blood cell count had dropped to nearly nothing. By April, I needed blood transfusions twice. Every 3 weeks, I'd drag myself to Siteman, sit in that recliner for 6 hours while poison dripped into my veins, then spend the next 10 days feeling like I'd been hit by a train. The nurses knew me by name. The valet guys knew my truck. The woman at the front desk started saving me a blanket because the infusion room was always cold. And during all of this, apparently, I was also making the 400-mile drive to Nashville to lurk outside my ex-wife's workplace. The restraining order had been filed by Karen's attorney, a woman named Diane Hartwell. It included an affidavit from Karen describing months of escalating harassment, sightings of me near her condo in Green Hills, a man matching my description photographed outside Vanderbilt's medical campus, phone calls to her cell from blocked numbers, and most disturbing, a series of handwritten notes left under her windshield wiper. The notes were photographed and attached to the filing. The handwriting looked like mine, not identical, but close enough to make my stomach turn. Things like, "You can't hide from 30 years, and I know your schedule, Karen. Every Tuesday and Thursday." There were also 8 photographs. In each one, a man stood at varying distances from locations Karen frequented. Tall, heavy-set, gray-haired, wearing glasses. In a couple of the shots, the man wore a green Carhartt jacket. I owned that exact jacket. Or rather, I used to own it. I donated it to Goodwill before my first chemo session because it was too heavy for me to wear anymore. Claire drove down from Chicago that weekend. She sat on the edge of my hospital bed and went through every document with the focus of someone auditing a Fortune 500 company. She made 3 phone calls before I'd finished my lunch. One to my oncologist's office requesting a complete treatment timeline. One to our family attorney, Ed Beaumont, a man who'd handled my business contracts for 20 years. And one to her brother, my son James, who was an IT security consultant in Denver. Ed was cautiously optimistic. "You've got the best alibi in the world, David. You were undergoing cancer treatment. Medical records don't lie." But Claire wasn't satisfied with just proving my innocence. She wanted to know who was doing this and why. "Dad, someone bought a Carhartt jacket, learned your handwriting, and drove to Nashville repeatedly to make you look like a stalker. This isn't some misunderstanding. This is a campaign." I didn't want to believe that. It seemed too elaborate, too paranoid. Who would go to that kind of trouble? But Claire had a theory she wasn't ready to share yet, and I'd learned over the years not to rush her. The medical records arrived by the end of the week. 341 pages documenting every appointment, every infusion, every blood draw, every emergency room visit. The timeline was airtight. On the dates Karen claimed I was lurking near her Nashville condo, I was either sitting in an infusion chair at Siteman, lying in a hospital bed fighting neutropenic fever, or collapsed on my couch too weak to drive to the grocery store, let alone to Tennessee. Ed filed our response to the restraining order, including the full medical record and a letter from Dr. Reeves confirming that I was physically incapable of traveling during the period in question. He also requested a hearing to challenge the order. Karen's attorney, Diane Hartwell, didn't respond for 6 days. When she did, she didn't back down. She claimed the photographs and handwritten notes constituted sufficient evidence regardless of my medical condition. She suggested I might have hired someone to act on my behalf. That accusation stung worse than the original one. Not only was I supposedly a stalker, now I was supposedly a criminal mastermind orchestrating harassment from my chemo chair. With what money? I was living on disability checks and whatever Claire slipped into my wallet when she thought I wasn't looking. It was James who found the first real thread to pull. My son is quiet, methodical, the kind of person who reads terms of service agreements for fun. He'd asked me to forward every piece of digital communication I'd had with Karen since the divorce. There wasn't much. A handful of emails about dividing the last of our possessions. 2 text messages, both from me, both brief. One letting her know I'd been diagnosed. One telling her the house in Springfield had finally sold and her share of the proceeds had been deposited. She never responded to either one. But James found something I'd missed. 3 months before the alleged harassment began, someone had accessed my email account from an IP address in Nashville. The login had lasted 42 minutes, long enough to read through years of emails between Karen and me, to study how I wrote, what phrases I used, how I signed off, long enough to learn my handwriting patterns from scanned documents I'd emailed to myself. "Someone studied you, Dad," James said over the phone. "They learned how to be you." That's when Claire finally shared what she'd been working on. She'd done what she does best. She followed the money. "Dad, Did you know Karen has a new partner? A man named Richard Ashby. He's a financial advisor in Nashville. They've been together since around Thanksgiving last year. I didn't know. Karen and I hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. Our children were our only connection, and even that was strained. Karen had made it clear she wanted a clean break. Claire continued. I looked into Richard Ashby. On the surface, everything checks out. Licensed advisor, small practice in Brentwood, drives a Mercedes, belongs to the right country club. But I started pulling threads. She'd found that Richard Ashby had previously been registered as Richard Ashton in Scottsdale, Arizona. Before that, Richard Atwell in Raleigh, North Carolina. 3 different names, 3 different states, all within the last 12 years. In each case, he'd entered a relationship with a recently divorced woman with significant assets. In each case, the woman's ex-husband had been accused of harassment or threatening behavior, resulting in restraining orders that effectively cut off all contact between the ex-spouses. And in each case, within a year or two, the woman's finances had been systematically drained, retirement accounts redirected, property transferred, investment portfolios liquidated into accounts that later vanished. He's a predator, Dad, not a violent one, a financial one, and he's been doing this for over a decade. I sat in my recliner, the port in my chest aching, and tried to process what my daughter was telling me. Some man I'd never met had inserted himself into my ex-wife's life, studied me well enough to forge my handwriting, and was now systematically isolating Karen from anyone who might notice what he was doing. The restraining order wasn't about protecting Karen from me. It was about making sure I couldn't warn her. We brought James into the loop that night. A 3-way call. The 3 of us piecing together a puzzle that was growing darker by the hour. James had continued digging into the email breach and traced the Nashville IP address to a co-working space in Brentwood, the same town where Richard Ashby had his financial advisory practice. We need to tell Mom, James said. She won't believe us, Claire replied. She'll think Dad put us up to it. That's exactly what this guy is counting on. She was right. Karen had spent the last 2 years convinced I was the source of all her problems. A man she was in love with, whispering confirmation of that belief, would only cement it further. If we went to her directly, Richard would spin it as further proof of my obsession. The restraining order would become permanent, and Karen would be even more isolated. Ed Beaumont agreed. We need to build an airtight case before we approach anyone. That means evidence that doesn't just prove David's innocence, but proves Ashby's guilt. Ed connected us with a private investigator named Dolores Vega, a former FBI analyst who'd left the bureau to start her own firm in Memphis. Dolores was small, sharp-eyed, and had a habit of finishing your sentences before you could. Within 48 hours of taking our case, she'd confirmed Claire's research and added to it considerably. Richard Ashton, his name in Arizona, had been investigated by Scottsdale police after his partner's ex-husband filed a complaint alleging financial fraud. The investigation was dropped when the woman refused to cooperate. She'd lost over $400,000 by the time Ashton disappeared. In North Carolina, as Richard Atwell, he'd been named in a civil suit by a woman who claimed he'd transferred $310,000 from her investment accounts into shell companies. The case was settled out of court. Atwell vanished from Raleigh 3 weeks later. He's refined his technique each time, Dolores explained. In Arizona, he was sloppy. In North Carolina, by framing the ex-husband as a stalker, he creates a situation where the victim actively resists help from the one person most likely to notice the fraud. What about the photographs? I asked. Who's the man in those pictures? Dolores smiled for the first time. I'm working on that, but I've got a theory. Her theory turned out to be right. Through surveillance of Ashby's routine, Dolores identified a man named Tyler Briggs, a small-time actor from Atlanta who'd had exactly 1 credit on IMDb, a non-speaking role in a car insurance commercial. Tyler Briggs was 6'2", heavyset, and bore a passing resemblance to me that could be enhanced with the right glasses, the right jacket, and the right distance from the camera. Dolores photographed Briggs entering Ashby's office in Brentwood on 3 separate occasions. She also obtained security footage from the Vanderbilt campus that showed the stalker and Karen's photographs arriving in a rented Nissan Altima, not my 12-year-old Ford F-150. The handwriting was harder to prove, but James found the smoking gun. The scanned documents in my email, old contracts and correspondence, contained extensive samples of my handwriting. Someone who'd accessed my email for 42 minutes would have had plenty of time to download them. A forensic handwriting analyst, Dolores, retained confirmed that the notes left on Karen's car were likely produced by someone copying my writing style rather than writing naturally. The letter formations were too deliberate, too careful. Real handwriting flows. These notes were constructed. We now had enough. Ed filed a motion to dismiss the restraining order, citing the medical evidence, the email breach, the rental car footage, and the forensic handwriting analysis. He also filed a separate complaint with the Nashville Metro Police regarding identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Diane Hartwell, Karen's attorney, requested an emergency meeting. We convened at her office in downtown Nashville. I'd driven down with Claire, 4.5 hours that left my bones aching and my stomach rolling. But I wasn't going to miss this. James flew in from Denver. Karen was already there when we arrived. She looked good, healthy, well-dressed, the kind of put-together that comes from having someone take care of you. Beside her sat a man I'd never seen before. Average height, fit, silver hair swept back, wearing a tailored navy suit. He looked like a catalog model for late-in-life success. Richard Ashby. He shook my hand. Firm grip, warm smile, eye contact that lasted exactly the right amount of time. David, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Karen's told me a lot about you. I said nothing. Claire had coached me. Don't react. Don't engage with him. Let the evidence speak. Ed laid out our case methodically. The medical records first, establishing the impossibility of my being in Nashville. Then the email breach. Then the IP trace to the co-working space in Brentwood. Then Claire presented her financial research, each slide building on the last. Richard Ashton, Scottsdale, Richard Atwell, Raleigh, Richard Ashby, Nashville. 3 names, 3 states, 3 women. The same pattern every time. The room got very quiet. Karen was staring at the documents Claire had spread across the conference table. I watched her face cycle through confusion, denial, and then something worse. Recognition. The slow, terrible understanding that the man sitting next to her, holding her hand, had been lying about everything from the very first day. Richard's composure held longer than I expected. He shook his head slowly, performatively. This is exactly the kind of elaborate fabrication a desperate person would create. David, I feel sorry for you. I really do. The cancer, the financial losses, but manufacturing a conspiracy theory to harass your ex-wife. Mr. Ashby, Dolores interrupted, sliding a photograph across the table. Do you know this man? It was Tyler Briggs, photographed entering Richard's office. He's a client. He's an actor from Atlanta with 1 commercial credit and a checking account that's received 3 wire transfers from a company called Brentwood Advisory Group. Your company, totaling $14,000. Richard's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A calculation, an assessment of exits. And here, Dolores placed another photograph. Security footage showing Briggs near Vanderbilt wearing the green Carhartt jacket. Your client appears to moonlight as David Mercer's body double. Karen pulled her hand away from Richard's. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Karen, don't listen to this, Richard said, his voice shifting for the first time. Harder, more urgent. They're trying to manipulate you. This is what he does. This is what abusers do. Then you won't mind providing your financial records, Ed said calmly. Your client list, your account transactions, the corporate filings for Brentwood Advisory Group and any associated entities. I'm not obligated to provide anything. No, Ed agreed. But the Nashville Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit might feel differently. They received our complaint this morning. Richard stood up. The mask was gone now. What was underneath wasn't rage exactly. It was something colder. Contempt. the look of a man who'd always believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room and was furious to discover he wasn't. "Karen, we're leaving." But Karen didn't move. She was reading Claire's research, page after page, her hands trembling. Claire had included the names of Richard's previous victims, 2 women in Arizona and North Carolina who'd lost everything. Contact information was attached. Karen could call them herself and hear their stories firsthand. "Karen," Richard's voice was sharp now, commanding. My ex-wife looked up at him. Then she looked at me. I must have been quite a sight. 63 years old, bald from chemo, 25 pounds underweight, the portacath visible through the collar of my shirt. The man she'd accused of driving 400 miles to terrorize her couldn't drive 4 hours without needing to lie down. "Sit down, Richard," she said quietly. He didn't sit down. He walked out. Dolores let him go. She'd already provided everything to the police. Running would only make it worse for him. The restraining order was dismissed 2 weeks later. The Nashville police executed a search warrant on Richard Ashby's office and home. What they found was worse than any of us had imagined. He'd already begun redirecting Karen's accounts. A retirement fund she'd built over 30 years of nursing at Vanderbilt, worth nearly $380,000, had been partially transferred to an offshore entity. Another $90,000 in savings had been moved to a joint account that Karen didn't know existed, one that Richard could drain at any time. If we'd been even 3 months later, she would have lost everything. Tyler Briggs cooperated with police almost immediately. He confirmed that Ashby had hired him to impersonate me, provided him with photographs of me, my old jacket purchased from a Goodwill in Springfield, and detailed instructions on where to be seen and when. Briggs had driven to Nashville from Atlanta 6 times over 4 months, each time spending a few hours being photographed near Karen's routine locations. He said Ashby told him it was for a divorce proceeding. He said he hadn't asked too many questions. $14,000 was a lot of money for a guy whose acting career peaked with a car insurance commercial. Richard Ashby was arrested in Chattanooga 3 days after he walked out of that conference room. He'd been heading south, presumably toward Atlanta's airport. The charges included identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and filing a false police report. When investigators connected him to the Arizona and North Carolina cases, the federal prosecutor's office got involved. Last I heard, he was looking at 12 to 15 years. Karen came to see me a month after the arrest. I was in the middle of my 5th chemo cycle, sitting in my usual recliner at Siteman, wrapped in the blanket the front desk woman always saved for me. Karen sat in the chair next to mine, the one Claire usually occupied, and for a while neither of us said anything. The infusion pump clicked and hummed. Somewhere across the room, another patient was laughing at something on their phone. "I should have called you back," she said finally. "When you told me about the diagnosis, I should have called. You were angry. I was selfish. There's a difference." She paused. "Claire showed me the email breach. He accessed your account within 2 weeks of meeting me. He was already planning this before our second date. That's what men like him do. They plan. I keep thinking about those women in Arizona and North Carolina. If your kids hadn't figured this out, I'd be one of them. He would have taken everything, and I would have let him because I trusted him." "You trusted the wrong person. That's not a crime. It's a mistake, and we've all made them." She cried then, quietly, in a way that made me remember the woman I'd married 33 years ago. The woman who'd held my hand during my mother's funeral and stayed up all night helping me bid on our first big contract. We'd lost each other somewhere along the way, in the wreckage of a business and a marriage that couldn't survive what happened to them. But sitting in that cancer center, 2 people who'd been used and manipulated by the same con man, we found something I hadn't expected. Not love, not reconciliation, understanding. The lawsuit Karen had filed was formally withdrawn. Ed filed a civil suit against Ashby on my behalf for defamation, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We may never collect a dime, but the judgment will follow him forever. Claire was the hero of this story. I know that, and I'll say it plainly. Without her accountant's eye and her refusal to accept the obvious explanation, Richard Ashby would have succeeded. He'd have drained Karen's accounts, vanished into his next identity, and I'd have spent whatever time I had left with a restraining order on my record and the reputation of a stalker. My son James was right there with her, tracing the digital breadcrumbs that Ashby thought he'd hidden. I raised those kids to be thorough, to verify before they trust, and it might be the best thing I ever did. My 6th and final chemo cycle ended 3 weeks ago. Dr. Reeves says the scans are encouraging. The lymphoma is responding. We'll do follow-up imaging in 3 months, and if everything holds, I'll be in remission. I'm not counting chickens. Cancer has a way of humbling your expectations, but I'm here, which is more than I could say for certain back in February. Karen texts me occasionally now. Photos of her garden, updates about our kids. Nothing deep, but she sent me something last week that I keep coming back to. She wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't believe in who you really are." I stared at that message for a long time, not because I was angry, because I realized that Richard Ashby's entire scheme depended on one thing. He needed Karen to believe the worst about me. He needed her fear and her resentment to be stronger than 33 years of knowing who I actually was. And for a while, it worked. That's the part that scares me most. Not the fraud, not the impersonation, not even the cancer. It's how easily someone with the right words and the right timing can rewrite your history in someone else's mind. I tell people now, especially men my age going through divorce, document everything. Keep your medical records, your phone logs, your emails, not because you're paranoid, but because the truth doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes it needs evidence to back it up. And if someone new comes into your ex's life a little too quickly, a little too perfectly, pay attention. Predators don't always look like predators. Sometimes they look like financial advisors in tailored suits who know exactly what a lonely person needs to hear. That porta-cath in my chest will come out next month if my blood work stays clean. It'll leave a small scar just below my collarbone. I don't mind. Every scar I've earned in the last year tells the same story. Something tried to destroy me from the inside, and I'm still here. The cancer tried. The con man tried. The false accusations tried. None of them finished the job. And that green Carhartt jacket, the one I donated to Goodwill before my first treatment, the one that ended up on the back of an actor hired to ruin my life, I bought a new one last week. Same color, same brand. I wore it on my walk this morning, half a mile around the block, the farthest I've gone in months. It felt heavier than I remembered, but I'll grow into it again.